Finally, today we want to take a look at the division of powers between the national government and the state governments. And so this system is basically set up by the words of the 10th Amendment, which says we gave these powers to the national government. Everything else should be left up to states. So we're gonna start by breaking down what are national powers and what are state powers. First thing you see here is a little bit of a Venn diagram. It is really important that we keep these vocabulary terms straight and that we can think about federalism in this way. So I've got a red circle and I've got a blue circle, and there's a little bit of space where they overlap into purple space because the system of government that the 10th Amendment sets up gives us a lot of things that are strictly for the national government and gives us a lot of other things that are left open to the states. And there is some overlap in national and state government roles here. So those things that belong to the national government only are called exclusive powers. When we say an exclusive power, we mean only the United States government can do this. When we have things over in the blue circle, the state government powers, we would call those reserved powers. So these are things that are reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment, and the states should be able to make those decisions. And then that little bit of space, that little bit of purple space in the middle there, we call those concurrent powers. So a concurrent power means the national government and the state governments control that at the same time. Let's look first at the exclusive powers. You guys are familiar with these because we've been working our way through the Constitution. So we talked a little bit about the powers that the government has. So these things are exclusive to the national government. Only the national government can do these, and the states cannot do these. So first one is an obvious one: coin money. That means only the national government can make decisions about our currency. That's really important. That solves a problem from the Articles of Confederation time when all the states had different money. Only the national government can make decisions about our currency. Only the national government can raise an army. So that means it's the national government's role to establish an army and to declare war. The next one there. So obviously, we only want the national government making these kinds of decisions. We don't want the states to be able to decide to go to war on their own, because states act in all sorts of different ways, and states might complicate our relationship with other countries. So only the national government can make decisions about the military and about when to declare war. Similarly, only the national government can control international trade, right? So we don't want the states making these deals on their own. We don't want the 50 states to be competing against each other in making economic deals with the rest of the world. We want the 50 states to work together so that the United States can compete with the rest of the world. So we've got those powers exclusive to the national government here. So if you look at this list, it's a lot of economic power, and it's a lot of foreign policy power. These are the two realms that national power is dominant: economics and foreign policy. These things we see on the list here are things that we want to be the same across all 50 states. So we want the currency to be the same. We want the war status to be the same. We want trade to be the same. So this is what we call our exclusive powers. The national government can do those things. Okay, so on the opposite end, we have the reserved powers. These are the things that the state governments can do. If you think about this, some of these are pretty obvious. So these are things that you would notice would be different from state to state. So it's not my first one on the list, but it's always the first one I talk about. Think about speed limits, right? Speed limits are a basic health and safety law. But speed limits are a great example of state powers because usually, think about when you're on a road trip somewhere and you cross the state line, you'll pass from one state into another state, and often the speed limit changes right there. When I have to go down and visit my grandma in Alabama, I drive from Tennessee to Mississippi. Both of those have 70-mile-an-hour speed limits, and as soon as I hit the Alabama state line, the maximum speed you're allowed to drive there is 65. Speed limits are a great example of how states make laws that fit the needs of their place. A couple of places have insanely high speed limits. Western parts of Texas, where almost no one lives, it's just wide open farmland, and Montana both have places where the speed limit is 85 miles an hour. And then you'll take some smaller states that are densely populated, and the highest speed limit in those states is 60. So that shows us how the states make their laws, but that the states are adjusting to the needs of their people and their surroundings. But other things on this list would be things like education. Okay, think about like the school systems are left up to the states. The states make decisions about what classes you have to take, when school starts, how many days the school year is, and things like that. You guys living in Memphis, you might know people right across the state line in Mississippi. They have slightly different classes that they have to pass to graduate. They have slightly fewer days in the school year. And on my end of things, there's different things you have to do to like get a teaching license there. So schools are a great example of a policy area that gets left up to the states to decide. Other things that we'll see here, like marriage laws, there might be different laws about how old you have to be to get a marriage license and things like that. A professional license is the kind of license that I have to be a teacher. You might have to get a special license to like do cosmetology, or special license to drive a particular type of vehicle or something like that. Something that I know you guys don't know anything about yet because you're all such great kids would be alcohol laws. These are different from state to state. So the states make their own alcohol laws, and they can set regulations on when alcohol can be sold. For example, here in Tennessee, we can buy beer and wine on Sundays, but we cannot buy liquor on Sundays. Across the river in Arkansas, you can't buy any alcohol at all on Sundays. And there's different laws about where alcohol can be sold and things like that. One of the most important things that the Constitution leaves up to the states would be requirements for voting. So the Constitution doesn't say much about who can vote, at least initially. A lot of amendments put restrictions on the states later. So, like, the states cannot discriminate based on race or gender, but voting rules are left up to the states. And so we have lots of states that might require you to show an ID if you want to vote. We states can still change the voting age. So every state allows you to vote at age 18. We have a couple of states already who have granted the right to vote to 17-year-olds. And we have some states that are looking at possibly even going as young as 16 for voting rights. So requirements for voting, probably one of the more important reserved powers to the states that we need to pay attention to. And then finally, we've got our concurrent powers. So you do need to be able to describe a couple of examples of these, and there's a couple really easy ones here. So the first one that I want to pay attention to is the power to tax. Both the national government and the state governments have the power to tax. This does not mean that they work together to tax, but it means that they both have this power. If you think about it, you guys pay a lot of state taxes because you guys pay sales tax on everything that you buy. So the state governments are taxing you guys, and those of you that are working, you have taxes taken out of your check by the federal government. So the national government is charging you tax. You guys are paying tax for programs like Social Security, and you have some federal income tax taken out of your paycheck. But you guys probably get that back at the end of the year. So both governments are allowed to tax you at the same time. Some other pretty obvious examples here. Both governments are able to define what is a crime. So the national government can pass laws that say this activity is illegal. So can the states. So we have federal crimes and we have state crimes. Both the national government and the states can punish criminals. So it kind of depends on what type of law that you broke. Most of the national government laws are about national government powers. So if it has to do with like counterfeiting money, if you're trying to print fake United States money, you're breaking a US law because that's an exclusive power. If you're speeding, you're breaking a state law because that's a state power. But both of these governments have the ability to punish criminals who are committing crimes. Okay, so that's it for our intro to federalism. We want to take a minute here and just kind of review the main things that you got to make sure that you can remember as we move forward. Now, first of all, you got to make sure that you guys can pretty obviously define federalism here. So I need you to make sure that you can tell me about the central government and the regional government sharing power. I need to be able to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages to federalism. So go back through that part, make sure that you'd be able to describe why this is a good plan for the United States, and also be able to explain why this is maybe a frustrating form of government. Those parts of Article 4 are really, really important there. So make sure you could explain interstate compacts, the full faith and credit clause, extradition, privileges and immunities, and we'll always have to be able to identify what kind of powers belong to the national governments and what kind of powers belong to the states. So moving forward, we're going to take a look at how federalism has changed since the Constitution was ratified.